When my father called 2 weeks before Christmas to uninvite me from his annual holiday dinner, he didn't even hesitate. "My stepson will be here," he said, his voice flat and unapologetic. "I don't want you making things awkward for him." He replaced me, his own daughter, for a man who had only been in his life for 3 years. So, while my family gathered around a warm fire, I spent Christmas Eve hundreds of miles away, isolated on a frozen stretch of highway during an unexpected whiteout storm. But just after midnight, my phone rang. When I answered, my father's arrogant tone was completely gone. His voice was trembling, barely a whisper. "Sweetheart, why are you on the national news?" He thought he had discarded me. He had no idea that my lonely night on that icy road had just put me directly in the national spotlight. "My name is Major Erica Sullivan, and I am 36 years old. For over a decade, I've served in the United States Army, so I'm no stranger to discipline, hardship, or standing my ground when things get tough. But nothing in my training could have prepared me for the cold, calculated cruelty of my own father, Arthur. Ever since my mother passed away 6 years ago, Arthur's house had felt less like a home and more like a stage where I was constantly being pushed into the background. When he married Brenda 3 years ago, her 30-year-old son, Julian, instantly became the center of Arthur's universe. Julian was charming, manipulative, and expertly played the role of the ideal son Arthur always wanted. I watched quietly as my father poured time, money, and affection into a man who hadn't raised him, while my own existence became an afterthought. But I stayed silent, convincing myself that as long as I kept the peace, we were still a family. That illusion shattered completely 2 weeks before Christmas. My father called me while I was finishing up paperwork at my desk. There was no warmth in his voice, no inquiry about my life, just a flat, uncompromising statement. "Erica, I don't want you coming home for Christmas Eve dinner this year. Julian will be here with his new partners, and I don't want you making things awkward for him." He didn't even give me a chance to speak before hanging up. I sat there in silence, holding the phone, realizing I had just been replaced. Instead of spending Christmas Eve surrounded by family, I found myself hundreds of miles away, driving down an isolated stretch of Interstate 80. A sudden, catastrophic blizzard hit the region late that afternoon, turning the highway into a treacherous sheet of black ice with near-zero visibility. Heavy snow battered my windshield, and traffic ground to a near-complete halt. Most drivers pulled over to wait out the storm, but the severe cold was already causing temperatures inside vehicles to plunge rapidly. Just after 11 at night, a blinding blur of red brake lights flashed ahead, followed by the sickening metallic crunch of crumpling steel. A massive multi-car pileup had just unfolded right in front of me. My military instincts kicked in instantly. Leaving the warmth and safety of my SUV, I grabbed my emergency medical kit and stepped straight into the howling freeze. The scene was pure chaos: twisted metal, shattered glass, and dazed victims trapped in their cars amidst the blinding snow. With local emergency services miles away and delayed by blocked roads, I immediately began performing triage, checking for injuries, and directing unhurt motorists to safety. Working frantically against the clock and the freezing temperatures, I moved from one smoking wreck to another. As I pulled a terrified young family out of their crushed sedan, a semi-truck skidded helplessly on the ice behind us, smashing into the empty car just seconds later. There was no time to think about fear. Lives depended on every single decision I made in that frozen dark. For the next 5 hours, the icy interstate became my battlefield. Frost bit at my skin, and the howling wind made it almost impossible to breathe, but panic was not an option. I moved methodically through the wreckage, using my thermal blankets to treat hypothermia and stabilizing injuries with whatever supplies I had. I organized a group of able-bodied drivers into an improvised rescue squad, assigning them to clear debris, flag down approaching vehicles, and keep trapped victims calm until professional help arrived. By dawn, the sky turned a pale, freezing gray as the sound of approaching sirens broke through the storm. Emergency helicopters circled overhead while news crews, who had followed the first responders, set up live broadcast feeds to cover the massive disaster. Covered in frost, my uniform stained with grease and snow, I was still mid-action, directing paramedics toward a heavily damaged minivan where a young mother and her 5-year-old daughter were pinned inside. I stayed right beside the little girl, keeping her warm with my own tactical jacket and talking her through the rescue until firefighters finally cut open the door. The moment the paramedics lifted her to safety, her tearful parents threw their arms around me on live camera, sobbing uncontrollably as they thanked me for saving their child's life. Unbeknownst to me, millions of people across the country were watching that exact moment unfold on national breaking news, including a man sitting comfortably by his fireplace hundreds of miles away, who had told me just 2 weeks earlier that I wasn't good enough to come home. Just after midnight, while the news camera was still rolling, my phone began vibrating continuously in my pocket. I pulled it out and saw my father's name on the screen. When I answered, there was no harshness in his voice, no patronizing tone, only a breathless, trembling stammer. "Sweetheart, is that you? Why are you on the national news?" He was watching the live broadcast from his warm living room, sitting alongside Brenda and Julian. "Yes, Dad," I replied, my voice steady and cold despite the freezing air around me. "I'm at the crash site on Interstate 80. He tried to stumble through an explanation, claiming he had been worried sick, but I cut him off. Suddenly, over the static of the news broadcast and the rumble of emergency engines, a detail on the road caught my eye. Right in front of me sat the high-end sports car that had initiated the multi-vehicle chain reaction by speeding through the whiteout and swerving recklessly. The driver had fled into the storm on foot, leaving the car behind. As I walked closer to read the license plate to the state trooper beside me, the background noise on the phone call revealed something strange. Brenda was frantically whispering in the background, trying to quiet a panicked conversation. I looked down at the abandoned luxury car's registration sticking out of the cracked glove compartment, then back at my phone. The driver who had caused this entire tragedy was Julian, my father's favored stepson, who was supposed to be at a high-profile dinner, but had instead run away like a coward. "Dad," I said, my voice cutting through Brenda's muffled panic over the line. "Tell Julian he left his registration in the glove box." Silence fell over the phone, heavy, suffocating, and absolute. "What are you talking about, Erica?" Arthur stammered, his arrogance completely shattered. The luxury sports car that swerved blindly into oncoming traffic, flipped 3 sedans, and caused this entire pileup belongs to your stepson, I said, reading the document directly to the lead state trooper standing beside me. Julian didn't just cause a catastrophic accident on a frozen highway. He fled the scene, leaving families trapped in burning, crushed vehicles in sub-zero temperatures. Over the speaker, I heard Brenda shriek in horror as flashing police lights suddenly illuminated Arthur's front driveway. First responders had already cross-referenced the vehicle's registration and tracked it straight to my father's house. The pristine, untouchable image Brenda and Julian had spent 3 years building dissolved in a matter of seconds. Julian, who had slipped back into the house pretending he had been asleep all night, was being placed in handcuffs for felony hit-and-run and reckless endangerment. Arthur tried to beg me to intervene, his voice breaking as he realized the magnitude of what had happened, but the truth was exposed for the entire country to see. He had thrown away his own daughter, a decorated soldier who risked her life for strangers, to protect a criminal coward who abandoned victims in the snow. In the weeks that followed, the fallout was swift and unrelenting. Julian faced multiple felony charges for fleeing the scene of a major accident and reckless endangerment, his high-flying reputation completely destroyed. Meanwhile, official commendations poured in from state representatives and military brass, honoring my actions on that frozen stretch of highway. Then came the calls from my father. Arthur phoned me every single day, his tone completely transformed from arrogant condescension to desperate pleading. He wept on my voicemail, begging for forgiveness, making excuses about how Brenda had manipulated him, and claiming he had made the biggest mistake of his life. He even tried to organize a delayed family celebration in my honor, desperate to stand beside me in the public eye and absorb some of the national praise I was receiving. He thought a few tearful apologies and a public pat on the back could erase years of emotional abandonment. When I finally took his call, I didn't yell or show anger. "Arthur," I said calmly, using his first name for the very first time. "You made your choice 2 weeks ago, when you told me I didn't belong in your home. You chose your new family, and now you have to live with the consequences of who they truly are. Do not call me again." I hung up, leaving him alone in the quiet house he had chosen over his own blood. Standing on the other side of that storm showed me who I truly was. For years, I had measured my worth through a father who only saw me as an inconvenience. But as I watched the sun rise over Carmel's coast months later, I realized that being rejected by him was never a reflection of my value. It was simply his inability to see it. True family isn't about bloodlines or superficial appearances. It's built on honor, loyalty, and standing by people when the cold winds blow. I had lost a father who never really stood up for me, but I had reclaimed my own strength, my purpose, and my peace of mind. Now, I'm curious about you who listened to my story. Have you ever been pushed aside by family, only to realize later it was the best thing that ever happened to you? Comment below and let me know the city you're watching from. I love seeing how far my story has reached. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and check out the 2 channel favorite stories showing on your screen right now. Thank you for watching until the very end.